Let's begin at the beginning. When and how did the idea come up to make this documentary?
I needed some work. So I'd met you before, hadn't I, at a rather average curry somewhere.
It wasn't average, it was terrible.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was trying to be nice. So we'd sort of got acquainted slightly. And then I was in my office one day and you posted something on LinkedIn and I went, actually, there seems to be a story about your dad that probably hasn't been told. And I'm fascinated by psychology. I just sort of sent Jamie a message and look, I'm sure you've been approached a million times and I'm really sorry for interfering with your day, but could we have a chat about this thing? And Jamie said, yeah, I've got 10 minutes. I'll spare you 10 minutes right now if you can. And I went to him, I'm so sorry, Your Majesty. And then
that set the tone, didn't
it? Yeah, didn't it just? And then I think we chatted for nearly 3/4 of an hour, and you pushed a load of meetings back so that we could continue talking. And it sort of grew from there, really.
Yeah, I mean, but you just said, why has nobody made a documentary about your dad? And I thought, well, people have. And then I thought, no, they haven't. They've made stuff about his career, but not about him. And it was because Ben wanted to delve into him as a person, and because we got on quite well, and because he called me Your Majesty, that it just naturally evolved and came to this.
Yeah, gosh.
Yeah.
I'm surprised at knowing you so well and our love for curry, how it started with a bad curry. It's just, yeah.
It was in France, though.
Yeah.
So, that explains everything, doesn't it? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I was going to say that so many documentaries could be made about him, but how did it become this documentary? When did you know that you were on to making something like this? Because you say in the film that you felt like you didn't really know him. It must have started with research.
We had tapes from his couple of biographies of his, but also I got in touch with John Huff, who made a documentary called Mr. Thunderbird in 2000, which was very career-focused. Did cover his entire life, but it was I think Dad had a lot of influence in it, and there were lots of things that didn't make it in. And John's sons very kindly donated a lot of material that you've seen today, which is an amazing resource. So, Paul and Jamie Huff were absolutely fantastic. And we just started to go through those things, and the tapes.
It was the audio tapes, really, wasn't it? That was the killer, I think.
They were, but I'd never really wanted to listen to them.
Well, it's because there was 30 hours of it.
Partly because there were 30 hours. But I started listening, and there was 6-year-old me constantly interrupting the tapes and listening to Dad, audibly roll his eyes every time I came in. And I started to hear him talking about things at greater length than I'd ever heard before. And just for a compare and contrast, I looked in his biography, and something like the very difficult story of Gerry Jr. takes up 2 sentences in the biography. And on the tapes, he talked nearly for 20 minutes. And I don't think you can express the hurt and the grief in 2 sentences in a book in the way that it really affected him. So those are things that kind of became the hook.
That's really interesting about the audio stuff, isn't it? Why do you think it was that he was more willing to open up for an audio interview? Because you've told me of several examples of visual interviews where people have tried to talk to him about Sylvia, and he's basically said, do you want this interview to continue, or do you want to talk,
I kind of get the impression that because they were for essentially his books, he could veto whether or not anything he said ended up in the book.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, now you've said, nah, sod it, we'll use it all.
How do you feel about making that decision?
I've had a couple of bad dreams where he's essentially come up to me and said, why are you doing that?
Yes.
And I get it, but I think it wasn't embarrassment as such, and he didn't want these stories never to be told, but there's something about that generation where they're not into introspection. not looking at any particular members of the audience, but I'm sure you've got parents or grandparents, and if you ask them an emotional question, they'll say, should we have a cup of tea or something? They just want to avoid it at all costs, and I think Dad didn't want his story to be told in a self-indulgent way or a poor me sort of a way. He'd had enough distance from his childhood to talk about that in some respects, but things that were more raw and more emotional, you heard him say, nothing gets better, nothing heals, which is just an amazing but terrible line. And he didn't want to open up about those things to the public. And I understand why, but they're such crucial parts of him as a man, as a creator, as a very human being.
Now we will
From the film.
Yeah, copying the film.
Very good.
We will come to questions from the audience to, have a think about what you might like to ask. So I know from talking to you throughout the process, how long did it take, by the way, from the first idea to...
April to now, so,
Right.
nearly, yeah.
A year.
I know you unearthed
Be a
a
year.
lot of things, and I remember you sort of saying, we found this now, we found this. There's a hell of a lot of material. So this is the skill as the director as well as the producer. How do you decide what to use, what to keep in, what you need to tell your story?
Well, I mean, by probably, I think the thing is the fact that the archive material just kept growing. So, what we initially thought we had was, so when Jamie said, look, there's 25, 30 hours of unheard audio archive, we kind of pitched and sold off the back of 25, 30 hours. And then everything else came in as well. And by the end, the edit, when it came to the edit, I realised I had something close to 90 hours worth of material.
Yes.
So, I watched 90 hours of either Gerry or people talking about Gerry. And it became, we've left an awful lot out, but it became very clear what the central themes were and what the main story had to be. And there are a lot of things that are wonderful anecdotes that didn't make it in. So yeah, stuff about Team America that didn't make it. Which he really enjoyed. He loved it. He absolutely loved it. Couldn't say enough good things about it.
That and Thunderbirds 2004 were his favourite films.
Yes.
I'm sure you'll believe that.
Yeah.
Tell me about the Deepfake. Explain that, and how you came up with it and how that worked as well. And also the special person we probably have in the audience.
Where is our deepfake?
Where's
Rolly, where are you?
Rolly and Christian, if you stand up for a second.
Please.
So what you have there is Chris.
More bald men. More bald
More bald men.
Any more bald?
Yeah, it's probably a couple. Well, I mean, so it was born out of the fact that on TikTok at around about the time that we were, discussing the show at the beginning, this deepfake Tom Cruise came out that had everybody, absolutely enthralled, and how's that done, and so on. And I just sort of poked Jamie with a bit of a stick and just went, look, is it really weird to suggest deep faking your dad so that he could say his own things on camera? Is that too odd? Unfortunately, because he was a technical pioneer. Your dad, not you.
Yes, absolutely. That is a very fair comment, Ben. Thank you.
No problem. I'm here to keep you grounded, as people keep saying to me over the last couple of days.
That's Your Majesty. Thank you.
That's right. Yeah. So I said, look, shall we do this? And Christian, who I've known for a long time, sort of he's very much into AI and was kind of the person where I went, right, okay, if we wanted to do this, how would we go about it? And we tried, or he tried a few different techniques, and we eventually, we managed to convince enough people with money that we knew what we were doing, which is incredible, really, because, I mean, the truth of the matter is a long way away from that.
You're not meant to say that in public.
Oh.
Okay.
Oh, well, never mind. There's nobody watching. It's it was just one of those moments where suddenly it started to come together, and I think, it's a dangerous question to put out, but I'm kind of intrigued. Deepfake, did it work? Did it feel weird?
That's great because you asked a yes and a no
Yeah,
question.
yeah, it's
so
good.
They both said yes and no.
It's good. I mean, I heard the word very good from somewhere, so that'll do.
I mean, the interesting thing is that Richard James, who's famous for being in a Gerry Anderson production, mentioned to me earlier that he'd seen a review of it, and they didn't mention the deepfake at all, which is kind of, isn't it? I suppose you worried that it would be like a real sticking point, and people would go, this thing, I don't know what to think, but actually, you just accept it.
When it was announced on Twitter, as a thing.
It's very reasonable, Twitter, isn't it?
Oh, yes. There's never any contentious people on Twitter. But we got a reasonable amount of sort of backlash, didn't we? I remember having to defend myself quite a lot, which I realised was completely useless.
No, you don't talk to them.
Just couldn't be bothered in the end. No, that's right. So I mean, the first number of interviews that we gave, the SFX magazine, and there was a lot of them. All they wanted to talk about was deepfake, and it's absolutely brilliant that we've now got to the point where the reviews are starting to come in and people are writing articles and they don't mention it at all.
Yeah.
And you think that's actually brilliant because they're focused on the on the emotional narrative that we wanted to bring to the forefront. Yeah, absolutely. And
the process itself, I mean, obviously there's lots of massively complex stuff that mere mortals won't understand, but Rowley, the actor, I mean, he had to put in a hell of a lot of work, didn't he? He had to learn this stuff because it's his mouth movements in there, isn't it, that are working with the AI.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's Rowley. Right. So AI, so deepfake doesn't know how to speak. So all the audio you heard had to be lip synced. So Rowley had to hit those beats. Every word had to be mouthed perfectly. And where it wasn't possible, then we had our fantastic sound audio dub, Kenny, wherever he is. He deserves his own standing ovation, to be fair. We had that as a challenge as well, as to hit those markers. But I mean, the process basically is you teach a computer what a face looks like, then you teach it what Rowley's face looks like, and you teach it what Gerry's face looks like, and then the computer, its job then is to work out that if Rowley's face is doing that, what would Gerry's face be doing when it looked like that? So it matches. So every frame, every pixel is completely made up. So it's not like there is a face plastered over another face. It is a completely CGI face, pixel by pixel. And it's just what a computer thinks Gerry's face would look like if it was doing what Rowley's face is doing.
And so it has to come from Rowley as well, doesn't it? From him.
So everything you saw would have been Rowley's performance.
Yeah.
Which is very weird, given the fact that he's barely in the film. He's there. You can see the side of his head as he walks over the bridge, but that is it. So no, it's quite a. It's
a fascinating
thing.
Process that I saw it, developing, as you know, because
you were there,
various stages of it. Anyway, our time is probably relatively short, so let's get straight to the controversial aspects of it. Everyone knows that when Gerry Anderson's mentioned, they think, it's Sylvia Anderson, because anyone who's interviewed him or had met him, know that it is a really sensitive issue. How did you approach that?
This is going to be me that answers this, isn't it?
Well, I will just preface what you're going to say, Ben, by saying, obviously, Mary is my mum. I'm the product of the third marriage. And being a product of that marriage and hearing what Dad had to say about Sylvia, it would be very, very easy for me to be entirely biased in his direction. And I'm very conscious of that, and I work very hard not to be. But knowing that I had Ben doing his utmost to bring in other stories and find as many voices to talk about her in as fair a way as possible, while saying, neither of them were perfect. They were both flawed, and they both caused each other a lot of hurt. So knowing that Ben was there was an essential part, and there were lots of times when I thought I was being fair, and he said, actually, no, fair's here, you're there, come on, let's nudge you along. And he worked very hard to put across a fair story, and I hope you feel that has happened. It's not going to please. If either of them were here, neither would be happy, and I think that's probably the measure of success in terms of telling the story right. So what do you think, Ben?
Thanks, Jamie. I think that the best thing I could do was make Gerry a human being. And in order, every human being, as he said, at the end, everybody has flaws. And I don't think anybody judges something, entirely correctly while they go through the process. But we were telling the Gerry Anderson story, which meant that we had to put over Gerry's point of view. And I hope that there were times when we were, I really was trying to be as objective as possible. That 90 hours worth of material that I went through was to, I really did try and find absolutely everything that could show a balanced perspective on how their working relationship sort of panned out. And I must say, it was, I really do think I used absolutely everything at my disposal to do that. And then similarly, there's one line that Gerry says, which I think is very important, which is that, she has her story and this is mine. And I think that is probably, the most important line in that section, in that sort of second act. So yeah, I think that's, I was telling Gerry's story from Gerry's perspective, from Gerry's point of view, in Gerry's own words. So it's never going to be a story that really says, maybe what the truth is. I don't know. It's very, very difficult to make that judgment, but certainly all of the material I was given pointed us in the direction that I believe, honestly and accurately portrayed, given the material that I had and the access that I was given.
Well, I'm sure if there are any therapists in the room, they will say the route to undoing the damage done by events in your life is to talk about them and to get them off your chest. And he didn't really ever do that. And so he carried them throughout his entire life. Lionel, for example, Dad claimed for years to have lost all the letters and photographs of Lionel because I don't think he could bear revisiting them. But obviously he hadn't, because they're here, we found them. But he'd put them out of sight, out of mind. And I think that happened a lot with anything that happened to him in his childhood. That became his way of dealing with conflict in general. So once somebody, as Mum said, once somebody's out of his life, they were out. So there were lots of fallings out. I think that became more frequent as time went on. And so by the end of his career, I would say from kind of 1988, 87, right through to 2005, he probably destroyed 10, 15 opportunities to make series or films, purely because he could feel conflict coming on, or was exposed to it, or was part of it, and his way of dealing it was to kill it. So it negatively affected his actual output, and I think it possibly made those around him a bit wary about how they contributed to stuff. So he became his own worst enemy in a way, which is terribly sad, because I wonder what he could have produced if he'd learnt to deal with that stuff early on. But it is so, and it cannot be any other way.
In terms of cleanup, I don't think we did a huge amount on the visuals. I mean, we actually went the other way, because obviously the deepfake we needed to make look slightly more like it belonged in a television, rather than the nice clean material that we shot. And we. A lot of the material was scanned in from pictures, so they were quite high resolution pictures by the end. And of course I'm very loud or something.
You're not at all.
No. So that was I was feeding back on something. I can hear it. And
so technical.
Sorry. So we then decided that what we would do is put everything in frames. So that we could create a blanket kind of style, so that you weren't really detracted by whether a photo was a good quality photograph or a poor quality photograph, and that was a creative decision we made quite early on. We bought all the televisions, and we decided that we'd make a uniform style to give it an aesthetic. Okay. The audio cleanup. Kenny, how long did that audio clean up? I mean, I know how long I gave you, but I don't know how. Which is a very different question. 2 days.
But I would also add that the photos of Lionel, for example, which are pristine, no clean-up done whatsoever, is because they were locked away. They were never looked at
Well, actually, there was one of the Preston Foster signed autographs we didn't know existed because it was stuck to the underneath of the main. So there is actually one Preston Foster autograph that has never seen the light of day. It's not, because it was so firmly wedged in the folder.
Yeah. So one of the things we missed out in the doc, actually, we had to edit out, was that after they did the film, Lionel hitchhiked to Hollywood from Arizona, went to the gates of 20th Century Fox and said, "Hello, we're British. Can we come in, please? We're friends of Preston Foster's." And the guy at the gate was like, yeah, of course you are. I'll put a call in. Preston Foster came to the gate, took them around the lot, took them to lunch with Judy Garland. Ooh. It's incredible. And he was writing back. All this stuff was coming back to Dad, and you can imagine how intoxicating that is. My hero brother met Judy Garland. Oh my God. Yeah. And so that's all part of the stuff that fed in. So lots of amazing archive, which has just never been looked at for decades. Gosh. Yeah, I think he probably viewed the Supermarionation series in particular as a bit of a sort of millstone, really. But that millstone became a calling card over time, particularly when the BBC reshowed Thunderbirds in the 90s. That opened doors for him again. Again, he'd lost the relationship, so he couldn't go to people and say, "Oh, you remember when we worked together? Can you set up a meeting?" He was going in afresh, but he was going in afresh off the back of this enormous commercial success. So he came to appreciate it for what it gave to his name, but I'll try not to use too foul a language, but he still thought they were little bastards. And I don't think that ever changed.
But also, there's something that we didn't include in the doc, was the fact that actually he found that when he was allowed to work with real people, he couldn't get them to do exactly what he wanted. So he was such a perfectionist that actually he hated working with them as well. So maybe there's just a common theme that occurs there.
They were big bastards.
They were big bastards, weren't they? Yes, that's right. Yes, yeah.
We have a list, John Taylor, I guess, is a good one. John was 100 when we did that interview, and it was the first one of the lot, and John was extremely deaf, and Ben, he was sitting from here to the front row away and shouting, bellowing to get the questions across to John, and John just wanted to talk all day about the technical stuff, about Dad as a person. I'm so glad we got him on camera because he was such a character and such a lovely man. So that's one.
And he said quite a lot that we couldn't use, which was such a shame.
Yes.
There were some beautiful phrases he used that just weren't suitable. He didn't like some people, did he?
No. He didn't.
That's the thing about making a documentary. You can't just put there what people say because there's a legal responsibility, isn't there?
Yes.
Yeah, we did get told off by lawyers for having it in, is what you mean.
Yes, that's what I was alluding.
Some things had to be toned down, but there are two other, I suppose, main contributors who we hoped to speak to, who we were not able to. One being Denise Breyer, and Ben and I were literally on the train to go and see her to interview her when she was taken ill, and she died a few weeks later. And she was so looking forward to chatting, and just a lovely lady, and she was there from so early on. So the cat, that was Denise, 57, and probably some bits before.
And then there was Betty as well.
Yeah, and then Betty, his first wife, who was all ready to do an interview for us.
How many days off were we? 6?
6 days away.
Yeah.
And she died.
Yeah.
And she'd been doing practice interviews, she'd had her pearl necklace restrung, she'd bought a new dress, she'd had her hair done. And, she was a bit reluctant initially because there was so much negativity from their relationship, as you saw. She was left...
That I suppose, in answer to your one very direct question, is which is the one that we didn't get. That it was her interview that I really wish I'd got.
Yeah.
I think that having her voice in there would have meant would have added a huge amount.
Yeah. But so glad that Joy and Linda agreed to do it.
Yes.
So thank you, Joy and Linda, if you're here somewhere.
Are you here?
Before we go to the next question, could I, on that theme, just mention about Dee and Gerry Jr. Can you say anything about their participation?
I could say Gerry Jr. is a very sad one, actually, because I'd been in email contact because he lives in Tasmania, and we were at Pinewood doing the Deepfake stuff with Rowley, which was very emotional anyway, and I emailed and I got a response back saying, look, I'm really sorry, and as many of you may have seen in the papers, Gerry has a terminal brain tumour. and his other half came back and said, so he is in no fit state, and I'm writing this email to you because unfortunately his reading, writing and speaking is not up to much now. And I just feel like he had such a tragic life, that is incredibly cruel. So that was a very sad one.
D we invited a couple of times. So I think, almost when we got a green light, we invited D.
She's
Sylvia's
daughter, just to be clear.
Sorry, yeah. And she didn't respond for about 8 or 9 months. In fact, we'd wrapped on pretty much everything, and we were very nearly delivering the edit. And then she emailed me and said, actually, can we have a conversation? I think there might be something that we can do. And I was like, yeah, great, let's have that chat. But we had a very good conversation, and a very solid relationship, I would have said, through the week that we had a discourse. And then she was advised not to take part.
Right.
So, unfortunately, you can't argue with that. So we just said, okay, well, there's unfortunately that, we'll have to move ahead without your voice in it, which is a shame because, again, a voice I would have really liked to have had.
Yeah.
It's all about that equality of voice and perspective, and we obviously couldn't get it. So you can't bring in what isn't there.
It's a very high-tech special method called Chris Dale. So Chris, where are you?
He's
Give us a wave. Yeah, there you go. So Chris is our absolute genius of Anderson stuff. And Ben would say, what we really need is something that conveys sort of sadness and loneliness here, perhaps with a hint of cynical regret. And then Chris would find that clip somehow.
Yes, but he'd find it within about 20 minutes.
Yes.
That's the thing.
So well done, Chris.
So if you've listened to the podcast, I'm always amazed by Chris's podcast elements, and I just sort of I said to Jamie, I said, do you think if I suggested that we did this as like an interstitial thing, do you think Chris would actually be able to find them, or are we on a hiding to nothing? And Jamie went, without missing a beat, no, Chris is perfect for that. It's exactly what he's for.
Yeah. and he did a great job, and I think it brought some much needed levity because, there were a couple of bits where you all had a little laugh at something, and I thought, there's a sad bit coming up. It's, you need that because it is a tragic story.
How wonderful it was, because we've obviously watched this film a couple of times. And you kind of forget that some of it's funny. Some of the things we put in there were funny originally. We went, it's a great clip. Ha! And then you watch it over and over again and you go, God, this story's really dark, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then watching it with you all today is fantastic because it gives you an entirely new, that sort of refreshing side of it.
That reminds me, can we elaborate on why he was a very, very evil man?
It's not even a short story, this. Essentially, Roberta Lee believes, and we don't know, there's no way of corroborating this, but Roberta Lee believes that Gerry locked Roberta in the studio while they went out for lunch and left her in the cold, dark studio for 3 hours while they went for a long lunch at the end of something else. And really, I think it's probably the fact that Gerry moved on without her and that she was perhaps a little bit bitter about the relative successes that they then had.
So he didn't actually lock her in a building.
Oh, we have no idea.
We
that's
tried
what
to find out, but she did say that.
She also say that he was a communist.
Yeah, she said nobody would give him any work because he was an avowed communist. Yes. Was her line, which again didn't make it in, sadly. But yeah, obviously she's there for impact and a different point of view, but I think she fairly quickly undermines herself with some of the interesting lines.
There's some interesting moments.
But it certainly added some colour, didn't it?
Yeah, I was going to say, I met your father a couple of times.
Yeah.
I never got the impression he was a communist. That's for sure.
No.
That is all Ben, 100%. And I cried at the Bridgestone when we were doing it, and every time I watch it, even though I know exactly what's coming. We were there with Rowley, and he just said, right, what I want you to do is touch that, and then he's going to come on. And I thought, nah, that's a bit cheesy, Ben. But he was absolutely right. And I don't know why you decided to do that, other than your pure genius. But
I don't know. I mean, the bridge, nearly just dismissed it as the bridge thing then, but the bridge moment was written in the initial sort of script that we created at the very beginning when we were pitching, and it was, funnily enough, there was meant to be a sort of call and repeat. So it was meant to be that something happened on the bridge at the beginning, and then it came back at the end. But actually, it worked better just coming at the end instead. I don't know. I don't know where it came from. It was just a creative idea that came to me probably whilst I was in the shower. Sorry, I was going to just take over then. You go.
No, go for it. All I was going to say is I hope that Ben will maybe revisit for a director's cut, but I think at the moment he never wants to look at this edit ever again in his entire life.
I think more to the point, my wife doesn't want me to take part in look at this ever again. I haven't seen her for 6 months. Yes, there will be a DVD and Blu-ray of it. We can't announce the details of that at the moment, but rest assured, yes, at some point we will be able to reveal that. There are other cinema screenings, and they will be announced shortly.
Yes.
When?
Glasgow. We're going to Glasgow for sure.
We're going to. So what have we got? We've got Birmingham, Glasgow, Derby,
Uckfield.
Oh, Uckfield. Now you're talking.
Where else are we? Bristol, Manchester. Probably mentioned that already. Don't know. There's a few more coming, and they're starting to ramp in. They all wanted to see it before they committed. Now that it's out, probably the ones we've got will cancel. That's generally the answer to that.
I have a theory. Do you have a theory?
I'll listen to yours first and then agree with it.
Okay. I don't know whether it's about the bringing together of the marriage, because it was a bit of an arranged marriage between Debbie and Joe, but I think there's something to a story that Linda and Joy shared with me, and they'll have to forgive me if I get the details wrong, but at some point when Lionel was at home on leave, he and Joe had a big argument. I don't know what it was about, whether it was about religion or something else.
Okay.
Joe then later wrote a letter to Lionel when he'd gone back for his second tour, basically admonishing him and saying, you're a letdown and I'm really disappointed in you. Then he went out on his second tour and was shot down and died. Now, I think Debbie felt, and I think said to him, if you hadn't done that, Lionel would have been concentrating, he wouldn't have been shot down, this is your fault. Now, later it turned out that the letter, I don't think, had been opened, and it was returned with his personal possessions unopened. But I think that was the beginning of the worst part of their marriage, and I suspect it might have been, it all happened because I wrote that letter.
Yeah.
I think he would have been slightly cross.
Oh.
Because all the stories that were told about him were always told with his approval. Pages from the biography came back, oh no, let's remove that, I don't want that, that's too emotional, that's it, I'm not having that. So removing that level of control, and again, as Joy and Linda said, he was all about control in that way, so that would have upset him. However, I wonder if it might have opened the door to introspection for him, and he might have gone, bloody hell, I never realised that. And it sounds ridiculous that someone might not know themselves well enough, but again, as I said at the end there, and I mean it, I feel a bit like I know him better than he knew himself now. So I'm sure he would have, politely sat here and go, oh yeah, well done, and then, give me a slap round the back of the head afterwards. So I don't think we actually had footage. We
don't have footage.
Contributors talking about it.
Yeah. The Marks talked about it, didn't they?
Yes, both Marks told us about it. There were a few stories that came out of that. There just wasn't enough time. But if you want to hear a bit about his reaction to it, then I did a podcast interview with Matthew Sweet, and he spoke to Dad around that time and gave the full story. Yeah. And yes, it was not a happy period of time for him, I'm afraid.
Do you want to tell the story around that?
As in the cheque?
Yeah.
Well, the number on the cheque is contentious, and I'm sure this has been mentioned in public, and if not, I shall say, I have been told by several parties.
Well done.
There you go, that's for the lawyers out there.
See, the lawyers are helping you, aren't they?
Yeah. So when the film was coming out and indications were not good for it because of early reviews, Universal wrote to him and said, "Hello, Gerry, we'd love to have you along on the red carpet. It'd be great to see you there." He wrote back and said no. They wrote back and said, "Hello, Gerry, it'd be lovely to have you there. And if you will be so good as to say some nice things about the film, you'll find a cheque enclosed." The cheque enclosed...
How much was the cheque for, Jamie?
$750,000. And he went to his good friend and colleague, Richard Gregory, sadly no longer with us, amazing man, and I will bleep out the particular expletive. He said, "Richard, if I tear this up and send it back, am I a total bleep?" And Richard said, "No, I think that would show you've got scruples." And he said, "Well, I have got scruples." And so he tore up the cheque and sent it back, and instead described the film as the biggest load of crap he'd ever seen in his life. Now, I know that it actually was an entry point for a lot of people, and a lot of people did love it, a lot of kids especially, so can't poo-poo it too much, but he certainly did.
Yeah.
A Channel 5 VHS, this is before Channel 5, the TV station, a Channel 5 VHS of Terrorhawks and watching it, and then being fascinated by the Zeroids and the Cubes and Hudson, and then walking through the house and going, "Oh, that's a cube from the thing I just watched." And he had the wooden, beautifully carved mould for the original cubes, and the same for Hudson around the house. And there was a strange moment of things sort of coming out of the screen and being part of real life. And then just from there, just hanging around studios and ridiculous things like seeing them make an advert for Domestos with a Domestos bottle dressed as a private investigator with a fedora, and very, very strange. But just starting to understand that idea of something can start here and end up out there. And that was intoxicating. That was a rather lovely thing. So that was the Royal Albert Hall, the Space Spectacular, and he, stopped and made a big thing of it. But all those times, I think, just seeing the reaction of people to anything Anderson connected is always amazing, and filled us with pride. And even Mum, I mean, she cried a bit on there, but she's very, very stoic, stiff upper-lipped.
She was quite cross that I made her cry.
Yes. Yeah, you're not her favourite anymore, Ben. But yeah, it's always an amazing thing to hear. And that, I mean, I must have heard that Thunderbirds theme, I don't know, 5,000 times. And whenever I do it, radio interview, whatever they always play as the intro, it never gets boring. I don't understand how that can be, but yeah. Well, I think he was always trying to be at the forefront of technology, right? I mean, you wouldn't think that for the puppets, but you think about what else was happening contemporaneously to that. He was always taking giant leaps forward. And New Captain Scarlet was his show, so he was the one driving that, going, right, here's a new great tool, let's use it, and using motion capture and stuff. And it, maybe now it's starting to look a bit old because CGI does age so quickly, but it was groundbreaking. It's weirdly the deepfake stuff in this he would have loved as well, but of course he can't be here, otherwise we wouldn't have done it, so he couldn't enjoy it. But I think now you look at stuff like The Mandalorian, for example, using virtual production and the virtual volumes, and he would have loved that and the opportunities it presented. So I think he'd be happy seeing things progress. He wouldn't be happy because he wasn't at the helm of them. Yeah. So there's many years ago I had a nightmare where I woke up in the dream and he was standing over me and he said, "What are you doing with my stuff?" And that was very much how he felt about others taking control of his IP in his mind. So yeah, technology-wise, he'd be using the best of the best.
Final thoughts on the journey, and are you at the end of it now, and how do you feel about it all?
We've got another couple of 3 months of screenings and Q&As, but this has been wonderful and such an honour to get to know Gerry in such a very personal way. I mean, I kind of feel like I'm I know him incredibly well, despite the fact I've never met him.
It couldn't have worked without you two getting on so well, could it, really?
No, that's part of the reason it worked, because it trusted a lot to Ben, and was very, very vulnerable and made the whole name very vulnerable, so huge kudos to Ben for that. And I just hope that you can all go away from this feeling like you know Dad for the first time, perhaps, and go away and enjoy the shows in an entirely new light, knowing that those heroes came from his personal life, those family dynamics came from his personal life, and those amazing worlds were ones that he wanted to live in so much. So, thank you.
Well, I've been very humbled to sort of get to know you and work with you. So I have bought you a little gift.
Oh.
I say little. It's slightly bigger than I anticipated.
Ben, is this the bit where yesterday you said, something's going to happen tomorrow and you're going to hate me?
And then I'm going to have to say sorry.
Oh, that's it, yeah.
Yes. There you go. Have a gift. It's a cardboard box.
I thought it was the cardboard box
Yeah, it's
they were
just
going to
the
put
box.
us in. Yeah.
It's just like everything.
That's come out.
No, I'm not showing any of you that.
Oh.
You won't be able to see from where you are, but it's actually made entirely out of Anderson-related stamps, as in ink stamps. So the whole thing is, everything is a Thunderbird stamp.
Isn't that lovely? Oh. Well, that's the best bit. And I didn't get Ben anything.
Hey!
Well done, well done. Well, there we are. Ben and Jamie. Sounds like an ice cream company. Thanks very much.